I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that Star Trek 3 is not as good as Star Trek 2.
Correct. I don't think anyone on planet Earth would disagree with your case.
Maybe Leonard Nimoy.
Welcome to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Another Pass podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I am joined by my host, Sam Alisea.
Hi.
And while I say as always, there was a long time before Sam came on as co-host, and we are today bringing back a guest from one of the earliest episodes. We are bringing back my friend John Broughton.
Hey guys.
Hi, John. Welcome.
Thank you.
And John, for listeners at home who have not listened to our episode on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, you're a Star Trek guy.
I am. I'm also a James Bond fan.
Oh yeah, I mean we all contain multitudes, but last time you were on, we were talking Star Trek stuff, and that was because we at the time had just wrapped production on a Star Trek fan film that you and I both worked on. And I say you and I both worked on. I worked on it. You made it happen.
Well, I had some folks that also helped. So,
well, it's a team effort, but,
yes.
But yeah, we had worked on Starship Farragut.
Yes, you and I have been working, gosh, I think going back 2007.
Yep. Yeah, it was January 2007, the first time I showed up on set for a Farragut thing.
Okay.
But yeah, and that I think you guys started that, 2005?
Yeah, we started in 2005. We actually, I mean, it goes back even further than that. In 2004, I started to pen the project, and it was entitled at the time Starship Excalibur. And that got changed to Farragut, and we made our series trailer a 1 or 3 minute proof of concept, because none of us knew what we were doing with the camera. We'd never made a movie before. I took out some money out of my 401k, purchased all the equipment, and I had tried to get a camera guy to film it, and I just, something told me that to invest and have everything. And I'm glad I did, because the person didn't show up, and I had to pull the camera out of the box. And between Paul Sieber and I, we figured out how to turn the camera on and point and click and make something. And we did all that in December of 2005.
Yeah. So it's been a long time of making Star Trek content, because Starship Farragut began as a love letter to the original series, and has had now multiple iterations or multiple episodes, as well as an animated series number of featurettes. So lots of great Star Trek stuff. And sure, we all love lots of non-Trek stuff, but why talk about non-Trek sometimes when the mood to talk about Trek strikes you? And so today we want to continue talking about Star Trek. And today is time to talk about an odd numbered Star Trek movie. So today we are talking about Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock.
Yeah, we are. That's what we're doing today. Odd number Trek. This is not a 5th episode, guys.
Nope. No, but it makes sense, because the last time we talked about Star Trek, we talked about Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, as an example of, like, this is what you can do under fire. When you're in a lot of pressure, you can make this amazing kind of production. I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that Star Trek 3 is not as good as Star Trek 2.
Correct. I don't think anyone on planet Earth would disagree with your case.
Maybe Leonard Nimoy.
Oh, that's right, because he directed it, didn't he?
Yeah. Although actually I say that, but then if you actually look at this movie, very clearly they love the death scene of Spock so much in this movie.
So much. So much. So
I would say even this movie likes Star Trek 2 more than this movie. But that's a high bar. Star Trek 2 is a truly great just movie in general. But it's hard to try to be better than it. And there's a reason all Star Trek movies, not directly since then, but of every time they kind of try to like breathe new life into the series, they kind of do a Star Trek 2 style thing. Like 09 is that, First Contact is that, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously Into Darkness is.
Yeah.
Nemesis is. We've talked about all of these on this show because they're rough movies for that. I mean, First Contact is pretty good, but But there's a reason I've talked about the '09 Star Trek. I've talked about Into Darkness on here. I've talked about Nemesis. I've talked about Insurrection. Like all these movies that are trying to do like similar kind of like, let's have, this like compelling bad guy, like to wave fists across from view screens, started there. This movie is not so caught up in that. This movie is actually trying to do something different, and that is a laudable thing. But it's not as big a success. It's just not as good a movie. I'm sorry.
Right. But I think it's still underrated. I think it's still has a lot of meaningful moments. It's a film that, as you pointed out, I mean, I believe that Star Trek II was the pinnacle of all Star Trek movies. And so it would be very hard to kind of trump that. But I think that, looking at that episode and everything that went on, I think after they made the film, they realized that we needed to bring Spock back. And so I think that the whole purpose of the film really was to bring Spock back to the franchise in a meaningful, logical way that made sense to the audience and Star Trek fans.
Yeah, and it was set up fairly well at the end of 2, particularly with the reshoots that they did later, unbeknownst to Myers, the director, and was one of the issues why he didn't come back to direct. Apparently, he was not thrilled with how that with the inserts that they put at the end with like Spock's capsule opening.
Yeah, they if you've ever read Nick Meyer's book, The View from the Bridge, Memories of Star Trek and a Life in Hollywood by Nick Meyer, he kind of talks to that. And then part of it I found interesting was his religious beliefs, being Jewish. And he felt that there was some issue or concern about bringing back someone from the dead, and he just thought it should have been left alone. But then, interestingly enough, he did, like, I think he wrote Star Trek 4 uncredited, and then he came back obviously for Star Trek 6, which he wrote and directed. I found it interesting that it was more of a metaphysical underlay in terms of another reason why he didn't do it. But I think you're right too. Like they did that scene. Remember, I don't know if they planned that deliberately as a means that if we needed to bring. I mean, it just seemed to all work.
I think it definitely left the door open because at that point Nimoy had expressed pleasure with the shoot, as opposed to after the motion picture where he wanted to make sure his character was killed the next time he had to put on the ears.
He was like, "I'm done with this. Thank you."
I mean, he wasn't going to do 2 until they were like, "No, we're going to kill him." And he was like, "How early?" And then the script leaked and they were like, "Okay, we're going to shuffle some scenes around." So it's a bit later in the movie than it would have been otherwise. But that's 2. And 2 is great. But I will say, so last time when we were talking about Star Trek 2, a big point I brought up is that it feels like a bottle episode of the show, in that it is set, I mean, almost the entire movie takes place on the bridge of a starship, which is actually the same set with minor redressing. So this is all big cost-cutting measures. Like, it is an extremely cheap movie. And it's a remarkable work. Oh
yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I mean, they even the shots that weren't on the ship, for example, the Excelsior Bridge, really, that it wasn't even a bridge. I mean, it was just like basically like, I guess 3 or 4 walls. There was no bridge platforms. It was just a chair with the console, and it was just cheap. It was, my God, I thought that set was horrendous.
Oh yeah, with the new one, yeah. But I mean, like with Wrath of Khan, it is basically a bottle episode where it's like, how much drama can you put into having basically one set? You were
talking about Star Trek 2. Okay.
Yeah, which we have seen in other things. I mean, this goes on later on with Deep Space Nine, whenever they show either Deep Space Nine back in the past or other ships or other stations that are Cardassian, and even with Starship Farragut, for example, when we did The Crossing, having like, here's the mirror version of that, and we can have, we could have Paul like talking at you and having like a standoff on literally the same set, but through movie magic, it's this big dramatic scene. And that shows that Star Trek 2 really cared and did a really good job of taking a simple concept of like just 2 ships, squaring off against each other and making it really dramatic. This movie is also very similar to a Star Trek episode, but I would say for the worse.
Definitely.
Because there's bigger ideas than what they, I think, had the budget for.
Agreed. I mean, and it shows in some areas, but
yeah. I mean, for one thing, the most dramatic place that they have, Genesis, like is a different location. It's just not the bridge of the ship. So like it's going to cost money there. And like they had a bigger budget, but it was still a pretty small budget. I think it was like 17 million after like a couple of like additional bits of funding. Yeah, so the original budget was 16 million and they got $1 million for reshoots. So I mean, it's a small budget for a major movie. Like if you were told like, hey, make a blockbuster sci-fi movie about space battles, and you were told 16 million compared to what people are throwing at studios now, that you would sound like a crazy person. And so it's a hard pass that they went into it. But I do think that they could have made it work if they were as creative as they were with Star Trek 2. But I mean, let's talk about this movie because John, I agree with you. I think it is underrated. I think it is, generally speaking, a better movie than just being lumped into like, here's all the odds.
Right.
But it's,
and it works. And, I think if you look at Star Trek 2, 3, and 4, they're very serialized. And that those 3 films can actually be bookend as a trilogy, as opposed to the other movies. I mean, and they work, they all work kind of well into each other as part of that trilogy.
Well, yeah. I mean, for example, this movie picks up right after 2. And, we are dealing with the emotional issues that we're left with 2, which is a good idea. And the imagery of Spock coming back, again, it's well set up in the movie before. So that's a good idea. And it is a very interesting idea to have this character go through the process of being basically born again. And coming back into his existence and uniting his soul. One thing I want to shout out for this movie is DeForest Kelley as Bones doing a Spock impression is so fucking fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like probably the highlight of this movie for me.
Oh, I mean, the highlight for me was Zulu's cape, but sure. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
I'm sorry. Like Takaya just kills the movement of that cape. But yeah, okay, fine. The highlight is what you said.
For me, I said for me. We can all take different things from it.
That's true. For me, it was the cape. It was amazing.
That's fair. Yeah, this is a Star Trek movie where we actually get to see them in civilian clothes in a way that I don't think we'd really seen that often. Like there's a little bit in the motion picture, and I'm not even sure how much we saw in the original series. Like this is actually getting.
I don't think we ever saw any of them in the original series in any outfits other than their uniforms. And
yeah, I guess they dress up sometimes when they go to Worlds, but not even that much in the original series. It's mostly them in uniform. So. Mm-hmm. It's a good opportunity for that. This is well in the wake of Star Wars. So we get a scene that's like a cantina type scene. That's fun. We get some more alien designs than we normally would in older material. That's really good. Christopher Lloyd is I think he does a very good job. And this is early in the Klingon world in terms of like establishing it. He's not Khan, and that would have been a really steep slope to try to like ascend above. But, I think he's a really distinct character. The downside is that Klingons of this era are still kind of just like, there is a Klingon. Like we have several that we could name, like Kor, for example, but they don't necessarily, like in this case, him being Krug, like I think he does a really distinct job. He has a really impressive record like in terms of like his accomplishments as a villain. He kills Kirk's son and he destroys the Enterprise. That's fucking incredible.
Yeah.
But, he's a good villain, but he doesn't ascend to the upper echelon of the ranks of all the great Star Trek villains. But it's, still solid. We have some high stakes stuff. Like I said, Kirk's son dies. That is a big dramatic gut punch in theory.
Yeah.
And the Enterprise is destroyed. And I would say this is the best destruction of the Enterprise in terms of dramatic stakes.
Okay, but the destruction code being all zeros, they didn't make you laugh a little bit?
Oh, but see, Samantha, check it out. They actually did a nice nod to the original series because there was an episode, and God, let this be your last battlefield. Is that right? With the 2 people from Chevron, black on one side, white on the other, and the other race was white on one side, black on the other, and Kirk destroyed was these 2 bad guys on the bridge were trying to commandeer the Enterprise. Kirk's like, I'm not giving it to you. This is my ship. She goes where I tell her. And so he initiates the auto-destruct sequence. And that essentially, I think, Case, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I think exactly the way they did it then is how they had it in this. So I thought it was a nod to what they had, what was already canon. But you're right, it's kind of comical, but it was a nice nod to recognize the original series.
I mean, all I could think of was Spaceballs. What kind of moron puts that as their security code?
I mean, that's the problem of a parody kind of influencing then your retroactive perspective on things.
Oh, right. Spaceballs, yeah, they did that,
I would have thought it was dumb no matter what, though.
Yeah. But again, it is a callback here.
In addition to the code itself, it's the voice of the authorized person. The computer's recognizing, so you can make whatever is your code because it's recognizing your voice.
Yeah.
Just like a retina scan, it's recognizing your audiogram, if you will, and then whatever code you deem, you put in. It's
there's stuff going on, and and we do get Spock back, which is a thing fans wanted. It's sure Spock's death is a huge moment, but going forward, you could feel his loss when he wasn't there in this movie. Like they try to make it so that like Bones is sort of like filling in for him because he has Spock's brain in him. But but you can feel that his absence, like there all these moments of like, all right, well, someone needs to step in and do the things because Spock was the thing holding the crew together in a lot of ways. And to continue doing more Star Trek stories, people would be like, hey, where's Spock? Where's the guy who was in the actual pilot for the show?
We do get him back. And then we have some of the underrated moments of the film where you get to see the Enterprise return to space dock. You see Kirk and crew going against orders to steal the Enterprise to save Spock. And then you have the Klingon battle. And then you have Kirk outmaneuvering crew when they beam over to the planet. Mm-hmm. Which I'd always wondered why they didn't just beam over to the ship. But I guess you couldn't save Spock otherwise. But
yeah,
they do outsmart, and that's a really cool, movements, and the soundtrack worked really well. James Horner came back from Star Trek 2, and so those are some, the movie itself, it kind of, in a lot of ways, it's made up by those great moments. And then when the Enterprise, it was like when it exploded, it was like another death of the crew.
Yeah, arguably bigger. I mean, like on the one hand, sure, everyone, all the living people have survived, but the symbol of the series is destroyed here. And it is a symbol that has mattered a lot to both the fans, but to the canon of the universe. Like, I make fun of Star Trek the Motion Picture a little bit for the amount of times people like look on lovingly at the ship, but it is a work of wonder. The Starfleet, the like the Constitution class ships, like all of this element of human ingenuity is so impressive. Like it is the testament of mankind's ability to then reach out beyond our home and go out into the stars and like make contact out there. It is the ascendancy of man in form. And it's such an interesting design. It's so unique from what we thought rockets were going to look like, prior to that in science fiction. It's so iconic. You can just do an outline of it and people immediately know what you're drawing. It doesn't look like anything else. So its destruction should have some weight. Now, it's been lessened by the fact that the ship has been destroyed since then, or been threatened to be destroyed a couple of times as well. So it doesn't have the same impact, but at the time, this is the first time it occurred. That's the Enterprise. There's this idea of like the Enterprise A never existed. Like nope, this is the Enterprise. This was the thing that we watched this crew go into the heavens and make contact with literal gods.
I actually thought it was a more moving moment than Kirk's son actually dying, partially because of the, I don't know if I would call it fight choreography that just looks kind of clunky during that scene. So definitely I get the reverence and the feelings for the ship. And I don't know what that says about me as a human. But
I think it's fair. And like from a symbolic standpoint, the Enterprise versus David Marcus, the Enterprise had been with us for longer and had meant more to us up until this point. Marcus had been established one movie prior.
It was a very nice hug scene, though. It was lovely in Con. So
it was, and on that, I know if I could deviate on that.
Yeah, go for it.
the hug when he embraces him, they were estranged. I mean, it seemed like his son hated him up to that point.
Mhm.
And then he comes to his quarters and kind of gives him some solace and because Kirk has just lost his best friend and comrade. And it's this really great moment. And when they hug, I mean, it's this awkward hug between the two of them, but it is a very good, poignant scene. I thought it was well done, and it just seemed very real, the awkwardness of it, that they were both feeling in that scene.
Yeah, it was a nice moment there. The thing about this, about 3, that I think is, I've heard a bunch of times, and I just sort of agree with it, which is that it underutilizes a lot of its potential. And so things like David's death is like one of those things that like this could have been a real moment, and Shatner does a good job with it, but it then doesn't inform the drama that occurs from it. It's not the inciting incident for more things in this movie. He is a casualty of this story as opposed to a major player of the story.
Yeah, or a catalyst of some sort.
And he becomes a catalyst in 6, but that's several movies later. Like his death is then a motivating factor for Kirk to have issues with the Klingons. But it would have been nice if that was built more into the text here, because you get to the end and Kirk offers a hand to save Karug, and that doesn't, the fight continues and whatnot. But it would be nice to have that be not just us interpreting that as Kirk being the better man, but to have the text support. But I do want to say on things that I really like about this movie. I really like that Mark Leonard came back as Sarek. I think, with very little explanation of who he is. Obviously they're like Sarek and then my son, they you get that part. They cover that relationship pretty easily for people at home. But it's so nice to bring him back because he's such a stalwart Trek actor. Like Sarek is such an identifiable part. The relationship of Spock with Sarek is how we've learned so much about Vulcan culture. Like that's really all very, very nice. Like works really well. And it's, it's nice to set up this logic fails me when it comes to my son. Like there are these moments of like really touching father-son dynamic, even though we don't get that much of them together on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a nice nod. And then in Star Trek 4, Sarek comes back as well as his wife Amanda Grayson. She also reprises her role. Yeah, so it was nice to keep the continuity of characters in Star Trek mythos.
Yeah, like that is just generally a thing I like about. I mean, like the Star Trek movies are the film adaptation of a TV show. So we have this larger universe. And I like the idea that players that we may have only seen once or twice in the show, but they're still out there in the world. They still matter. And I like this big shared universe for those characters. Like I like when an actor shows up and is playing that same role, and like they mean something because they're bringing emotional weight from their previous appearances.
Right.
And I think that's great. It makes the switching to something bad. It makes the Saavik recasting a little bit rougher because it's just she's such a new character, and the V recast like just feels strange. It like feels like such a whole cloth new person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so why don't we shift to the things that are kind of rough about this movie? So we'll start with Saavik because I just mentioned it. Unless someone else, or unless you guys have something else you really want to bring up that was like a big strong point.
You did have some. You had me thinking about whether or not when Shatner's son, when he realizes that his son's been killed, he falls out of his chair. He says, "You Klingon bastards," and that. And I wonder, had Nick Meyer been directing him, because in his book he talked about how he had to work Shatner over and over to get the best performance. Whereas Nimoy, you got him when he was fresh, and you'd always get him like in one take. But so you had to time everything between the two. And with Shatner, I mean, I think the way that Nick Meyer directed Shatner in 2, and then probably the same in 6, in terms of wearing him down to get the much more natural, realistic acting from him. I wonder, had that scene been a little bit more better if it was a different director than Nimoy, but
yeah, if it had been a little more grounded, because Shatner has a tendency to kind of fly or, go over the top. And, clearly Nimoy's not grounding him in some of these scenes. It's fine. He's not doing the worst.
But it's theatrical, or and by that I mean stage theatrical. He's playing to the audience, or or he's playing to the back seats, to the mezzanine.
Absolutely. Sometimes even worse during his voiceover in the beginning, which is hilarious because you're literally just doing a voiceover, sir.
I think it might be kind of like when you have athletes who go on to be sports commentators or coaches, the ones who aren't necessarily the superstars tend to do better, because they actually have to understand the game from the perspective of someone who's not a natural talent, versus the Adonises who are just a prodigy at a thing. They may not have the ability to articulate, oh no, you have to do X, Y, and Z, because for them it's so natural that they just don't have the language for it. And I wonder if Nimoy just wasn't able to articulate how to act as if you were William Shatner. He was articulating how to act if you were Leonard Nimoy.
Now I tell you, Sam and Case, another scene that I thought he did pretty well, because you can see the wheels turning in Kirk's head, is when he's talking to his boss, the Admiral, about taking the ship back to Genesis. Absolutely no, and you can just see the wheels turning in Shatner's and in Kirk's head about really going against orders, risking everything, putting his whole career in jeopardy for his friend.
Yeah.
And there's some good, I always enjoyed that piece, because when you watch that, you can just see he's totally committed. He's going to go against orders. Nothing you can say can change his mind. He's just kind of appeasing the Admiral. Yeah. And then, we're going anyway. And then how they steal the Enterprise, that was pretty cool.
I also want to say that his best delivered line is possibly one of his shortest, but it is the best delivered line. And it's, I lied. When the Klingon's like, I thought you were going to kill me.
Oh,
and he just turns around. He's like, I lied. It was just such a, even the scene before when he was like, are you going to help us or do you want to die? And the guy's like, I don't deserve to live. It's like, okay, well, I'll kill you later because you have stuff to do. That was really great. That was a funny moment. And then the follow-up to that, just him looking just so calm and being like, yeah, I lied. It was great.
Yes.
That was great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Shatner gets a lot of flack as an actor, but I don't think he's a bad actor. I think that he has some quirks that were exacerbated during the movie era. I think it starts with this movie, frankly, but some of those are delivery quirks. Some of those are just the way it's edited. I think we've all seen projects that, you can see when a tighter editor can save deliveries because you don't linger on a person's face, or you don't get the moment before they say the line or stuff like that. And I think this movie has a few spots where it could have been clipped a little bit shorter and a little bit tighter, and this, you wouldn't feel there's these big pregnant pauses between spoken bits. So I'm just going through my notes of just to make sure I didn't miss anything else that I kind of enjoyed.
It's we must do all the positives right now.
Well, again, I think this movie is undervalued, but most of the areas where I think it's good, I think we could probably do a little bit more with it. Because when we get to our pitches, I honestly think that the outline of this script is pretty solid. What is it? Harv Bennett both wrote and produced, and he's usually good at pitching the idea. It'd be a story by credit, but really shouldn't be the person to write the script. And I feel his ultimate script, and then Nimoy, who is a rookie director here, I think those two factors are the biggest reasons why this movie doesn't come together as being more than the sum of its parts. I
can see that. I also really did her sticking that kid in the closet. I just thought that was fun.
Oh, with Uhura, yeah, that gave her some meat of a role. Yeah, it's the movies. They did give these nice spotlights to some of the ancillary characters like Chekhov, Scotty, Uhura, Sulu. It gave them some nuggets of something that than what we typically saw in the original series. And that was a nice moment where she put, like you said, put him in the closet.
Yeah, because he was being very, first he had a little bit of hero worship, and then he was just like, well, he basically told her she was being put out to pasture. She just turned around and was like, you're going to get in that closet. And it was great. It was wonderful. Be quiet, young man.
Yeah, those are all nice moments there.
This is the old person in me that's upset with teenagers who ride the train.
Well, that's
it's a personal note.
I mean, that guy has a very punchable face.
I mean, he definitely did. He delivered his lines flawlessly for someone who wanted to be punched.
But like looking at this movie, I just couldn't escape the thought that this feels like an episode of the show. I felt that while we get good moments for everyone, some of the lines are a little clunky. But worse is the camera work is very clunky. Like there's very few spots where it's really dynamic, where we're really trying to say something with the way the camera is positioned and the way the scene is lined out. It looks more like here's a flat kind of shot. Here's the raw data is being presented, but without some like an authorial eye to it all. And I feel like that continues to sort of like affect all of these scenes that are like serviceably written. All the stuff that happens in it is fine, but it could be more dramatic. It could be more interesting. And in some cases, it's less interesting than even the camera work we would see on the original series. Like, for example, the very end of the movie, when Spock is back and everyone comes up to sort of surround him and be happy that he's back alive, like that looked like that just looked like a flat shot from a TV show. You're not getting like individual close-ups. You're not doing anything like that. Almost, Sam, you called out the fight choreography with David. Like if the camera work was more interesting, that probably would be a more noteworthy kind of scene. I think there's a lot on Genesis in general that could have been more interesting. And
that's a very good point, Case. And I know Leonard Nimoy was a photographer. I don't know if when he dabbled in photography, but and he's very cerebral as a person. I mean, he's very intellectual. He's always and creative as well. But so you think there would have been a lot of ways. And had I directed it, I might have had like a dolly shot where I was going around them very slow and showing all the interactions between, because it was just a straight pan and it wasn't anything spectacular. And for that moment, we've waited the whole movie to see Spock come back. He's now back. And, there's this nice moment with, the camaraderie being rejoined. And it should have been filmed a little better. I never even thought of it, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, even just individual coverage, like just get if you got each of them like their eyes lighting up as they see their old friends, like the spark of his intelligence in them. But we get none of that. It's just like let's bring them together. And like I said, the action, the action scenes like are the same deal.
A TGIF like after school special kind of feel, like roll the Family Matters theme song as you scroll out from everyone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any of those theme songs really just, he's together with them. Yay.
Well, and that goes like from frame one of this movie, you can see how it is just not as dynamic a directorial style as two. We open with showing footage from the first movie. I don't even know how to really properly like articulate this. Like we're gonna like have like a small image of it and zoom in on it. Yeah. And just show the last scene of the movie. I guess it's kind of Rocky-ish, but like I don't think those are necessarily the highlights either of the Rocky movies. Doing that component. But it might, I guess, just be like kind of an 80s movie trend.
Maybe. It was very sepia, tiny screen.
Yeah, and zooming in on it just in time for it like to be full screen for the like no one's more human, like that whole chunk right there when it finally dominates it. But here's why, by itself, I would be like, that's a lazy way to show it, but it's not the end of the world because you're reminding everyone of the important details of the previous movie. Very shortly into the movie, we have an almost line for line recap of that scene when Sarek shows up. Like he reads Kirk's mind and we get all of that. And then they go and they watch the footage of the exact same scene. And then they like rewind a little bit, but they watch that footage right there. And at the end of the movie, Spock like verbatim goes the exact same lines, ship out of danger, etc. And it's like, this is too many times, guys. This is too many times.
Too many times. They needed an editor.
And it's frustrating because none of these, like, so the Sarek reading Kirk's memories of Spock's death, I think is a really visually interesting, or maybe not visually, is a really dramatically interesting way of presenting that information. You know, I think that that's such a cool component of the father's through his son's best friend's eyes, like capturing that moment. And the security cam footage by itself also pretty much fine. You know, like, sure, it's a little weird that you're just showing footage from Wrath of Khan as opposed to like what a security camera would actually look like. And like, God, can you imagine if they did that? That would be fucking great. Like, it's not like they didn't have Leonard Nimoy to shoot it.
But think of the budget.
I realize. I got you. But like those would have been so cool. And you could have done something interesting with that opening one too. But again, it's like the most bland version of it because they're just playing the actual footage, but like miniaturized, and then we're zooming in. And I think that that's just sort of indicative of like, there's a lot of hand holding in this movie of like, here's the data you need to absorb, and not a lot of us like actually feeling the emotions of those scenes that I wish we got more of. Because like, for example, like who could be thinking about those scenes? Kirk could be, or Bones could be. Like you could have, like we could be inside their heads. Like we could open with stuff like that, or show the fucking security camera footage stuff. Like have them reviewing the tapes. Like, you know, it's just we spend a lot of time before we get to like all the times where it would have been natural, which is why they show it so early. But you lose out on the moments of those really interesting versions of telling that story in lieu of, okay, right off the bat, we're going to tell this one. And then because it's part of the story to have Sarek go through it, and then they show the footage again, and then they have Spock do the dialogue later. We just keep doing the death scene again and again and again. It's like, oh, right. Yeah. Remember that important moment. Let's just keep hitting that nail on the head.
Yeah. They beat that to death, that death scene.
Yeah.
Pretty badly. I mean, I guess in some ways, and I guess we've discussed this a couple of times now because we did T3 and Alien 3, that this kind of also suffers from a third movie syndrome kind of thing, calling back to a much better second film. A lot, especially in the first half of it, because this movie doesn't really like pick up until you get underway for the actual mission. You know, I would say like it starts getting fun the minute you get to, well, the gears working in Kirk's brain and the breaking Bones out of the holding cell for the loony bin, because you're not quite at the loony bin facility yet. And kind of, you've got your boys are back in town moment where everyone comes in to make that human heist happen. And then after that, you know, you've got some moments that you're just kind of like, oh, this probably could have been better written. But for the most part, the movie takes off after that. It's just because the beginning is so referencing all the time this thing that happened to make sure that you remember that it happened, because it's going to mean something in the end. It's a little rough. It's a little rough to get through.
Yeah. My notes for the pitch, a lot of the events of the second half of the movie, I would bleed in earlier. Like I would start a lot of that sooner, because I think we lose a lot of the dramatic stakes by virtue of spending a little bit too much time. Speaking of the getaway, by the way, this isn't a huge note. This is just like, who the fuck okayed this one? when the Excelsior breaks down and it's like the engine shutdown noise, that's just like a generic like internal combustion engine shutdown noise. Like, who greenlit that?
I think this has more to do with budget than anything else.
No, it has nothing to do with budget, because this is just whatever sound effects person put it in. I mean, I guess it could be like they were like pressed for time and had a placeholder, and then they were just like, oh, we never recorded something new. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm just guessing the Foleyers was like, will anyone actually notice? They didn't realize Case would notice.
I have read several reviews today of people who called it out, so I feel like everyone noticed that.
Okay, so a lot of people would notice.
Can we talk about Pon farr?
Oh yeah, that was in there.
Yeah, that was in there.
So I never got it during the first film, but when I was younger, but when I first saw it in drive-in theater. But I guess, did Savick and him, or she just somehow calmed him down without any real physical contact.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But what makes it rough to say those words is that they go into great detail about what Ponfar is right beforehand, and they didn't have to.
No, they did not.
She's like, Ponfar, once every 7 years, they must mate or they will die. And then, you know, we have the scene. And like, when we cut to it, she's like lying with him, but they're fully clothed. You know, it's not staged as if they slept together. But that's not how we understood it at this point to work.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have like I have a calming trance that can help him or something. Or like,
I mean, they did do the thing with their hands, and I think it had a soothing effect.
Yeah, like they may have had sex in his mind.
Maybe. Still creepy.
Yeah, I mean, like there's some weirdness going on in there in general.
Well, the weirdness gets even more weirder because the character of Saavik, although it was never revealed, I think I read in a book that Joan Linville's character in the Romulan incident, the Enterprise incident episode where you had Spock and the female Romulan commander, and supposedly they had sex, and Saavik was the offspring. And that would be even more.
Oh, that's even weirder. I knew about the half Romulan thing. I did not know it was supposed to be Spock's daughter.
Yes, because she's half Romulan and half Vulcan.
Right. I will note that you could also, this is also an easy workaround of have it not be fucking Saavik.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. That would be preferable after learning all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just throwing this one out there. Like, if you couldn't get Kirstie Alley back, and Star Trek likes having the same actors reprise their roles. Like, we're touting the strength of Mark Leonard coming back as Sarek. Not a terrible time to just be like different Vulcan, especially because this Saavik is written very differently from the one from 2. You know, she comes off very much as like straightforward. This is a Vulcan, versus in 2, you know, there's a little bit more of that fieriness to her.
Right, they are very different. Yeah, and whereas Kirstie Alley's character is or version of Saavik is trying to kind of still figure out humans, and Saavik seems, what was her name, the actress? The second Saavik seemed less preoccupied with that.
Robin Curtis is her name.
Yes, Robin Curtis. Thank you.
Yeah, no, she seemed much less, and she seemed to really understand and point out to Kirk's son anytime he had a very human flaw. You're like, oh, you're just like your father. Oh, like you're flirting with me. You're just like your father. Like, so it is very different.
Yeah, it's almost like the first one was trying to figure things out. The second one is she's already figured it out because she's already pointing to people, like, instead of getting guidance, she's actually telling David Marcus, oh, so the other Saavik would have likely have asked questions versus explaining away what David Marcus did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like, so there's a reviewer that I rather like, who goes by SF Debris online. Used to be like one of the Blip school of like video essayists, and now is mostly YouTube. SF Debris pointed out a detail that I thought was actually kind of interesting because I didn't really catch it, which is that when she gets mad, we'll say, I mean, she's a Vulcan, but when she gets mad at David for when it's revealed that it was all based on protomatter, like the tech for Genesis, she talks about like the blood is on his hand because of his impatience or whatever. No one has died at this point that is actually related to the protomatter part. It's all due to the tech for Genesis in general, which doesn't, like, if it was stable, everyone who died would still be dead. Like no change would have occurred if the science was better. And it was weird that they introduced that device just to have the exploding world part, and then for her to respond that way about it, because it's not like there's no flaw from the fact that it's a shitty process. Like all the things that have gone wrong so far is because it was successful.
Yeah.
And so it didn't really matter.
I was actually thinking the same thing too. And I was like, but like there's a lot of people that died, but I don't think it was because of that. So like, why are you lashing out at him specifically? It felt weird. It felt like a weird line. I think that line was specifically put in there, or that whole scene was put in there so that she could say, "You're just like your father, bending the rules," and we could get another reminder that it's Kirk's son, without much thought, if whether or not that was like an actual valid poking point at him.
Right, which you could just remove if it wasn't Savick, because like if it's a person who doesn't know Kirk or doesn't know Kirk well, then it's fine. It's just like additional reminders of this is not the same person. And also the stakes are not being articulated clearly.
But again, this is a third movie, and maybe we'll find that this is a real pattern. And if she says you're just like your father, then we're still pointing back at second movie. So
So let's talk about the death of David, because we talked about how the choreography is a little rough. So I think that Kirk's response is backing up, because we started talking about Pon farr and we didn't finish.
Did we not finish it? Did we not finish that? I feel like we should be done with that. I feel like it makes everyone uncomfortable.
It makes us all uncomfortable, but we have to talk about the Pon farr.
Fine.
So the fact that they brought it up is like one thing, and I don't hate that they sort of discussed it. It's just weird that this is very clearly a Spock who fucks, but at the same time they didn't want to have scenes of I don't know what you would call a young Spock, but he's not young. He's like a de-aged Spock hooking up with this character who might be his daughter. Also weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, things that you could have either shot in a way that would have been like kind of dramatic or sexy. Like Star Trek has not been afraid of sexy stuff, but it's But
do we want to watch Spock at that age be sexy?
I mean, he's what, like 15, like 15-ish in the at that point.
That's still too young.
What if it wasn't that age? What if they didn't deal with it until he was like a young adult, and then you could actually have a nice moment for like a hot Spock?
Maybe, but they didn't, and so this makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's all weird.
I mean, like, honestly, like, again, if you change who she is and he's older when it happens, fine. But since I now know this information about him maybe being related to her, and he's also about 15, no, nothing about this scene was fine.
Yeah, it's a real Marty McFly with his mom situation here.
Yeah, although it's kind of different because it's Marty McFly with his daughter. So he'd gone to the future. I don't know.
Well, he went back to the future because we got Christopher Lloyd.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the death of David, because that is less uncomfortable for us to talk about, and it's more just frustrating that the scene itself is not that interesting. Even if Kirk, I think, reacts appropriately to the death, he's shocked, he stumbles, he's having a hard time. He's capital A acting when he does it, but it's still I think that's the right response for him. But then David's death, the actual scene it kind of is like at a weird sort of perpendicular angle to it all. It doesn't seem as like really intense kind of fight choreography. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and then, like I said, there isn't a lot of resolution to it in this movie. Like Kirk isn't, I have to track down the man who killed my son for the majority of the time after, like the scene right there he is, but like it doesn't seem to inform his decisions later. And then it kind of just feels like a reset in terms of like the world that we're in. And it's, along with Spock coming back, it's like, oh yeah, the person who died in the movie before is back to life. And the person who we introduced to is going to have a meaningful relationship with one of the main characters is dead.
Yep.
Back to the status quo.
It's a reset.
Which is kind of a bummer, I think that one of the reasons the odd even rule exists for Star Trek is because we're not continuously building upon what came before. There's this element that tries to bring it back to the serialized nature of the show each time, rather than growing into something new.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, that's why 2 is so good, because they're exploring the themes of aging. And 4 is honestly so good because they're exploring the themes of the sins of our time impacting the characters in the future. And 6 is such a great send off to everything that had come up until that point. But But 1, 3, and 5 all have the same problem where they are doing things like the TV show and having it be status quo and like kind of feeling like, yep, it's just an episode of the show.
Right.
Like 1 is great in that it is a wonderful episode of the TV show, but all the things that had changed in the interim between the third season and this movie, like get reset, like Kirk takes over the Enterprise and like that's it. He's just in charge. Like everything is just playing like a normal Star Trek movie. Like the characters who are introduced in that movie leave at the end of the movie. 2 throws the table over and, like the shit's really different at the end of the movie. This movie's like, let's get back to, I mean, sure, the Enterprise is gone, but like all the characters are still in play. Like 4 has the benefit of being a different ship, different people, or, different time, all that stuff. But 5 is like just one of the many times that Star Trek has encountered God. Like, like who mourns Adonis? They encountered fucking Apollo. Like, how different is that for someone than meeting quote unquote God? Why does God need a spaceship? Well, we've met a few gods who needed spaceships.
I mean, they're better travel than just using your god powders, I assume. It's laziness, convenience.
It's so far.
Yeah.
God gets tired. So yeah, like the movie. Again, it feels like it is a good movie at best, but it's not a great movie. And it has the seeds of great stuff, I will say that I think that they squandered the resurrection of Spock. I think that the movie could have capitalized on it to have some real biblical imagery here. And maybe biblical is the wrong term, but like mythological elements, this component of someone coming back to life is truly incredible. Like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity at this time in Star Trek for a character who died to come back to life. It is an opportunity to have a discussion about the soul. Like I actually really dig a lot of the Vulcan spirituality that we get in this movie. It feels contradictory to the overly logical way that we've been presented so far, but at the same time, it is actually fleshing them out as having a full culture. And that the pretense of logic doesn't necessarily preclude them from having art and from having philosophy and from having religion, from having ceremony. Like, because there's meaning to ceremony that goes beyond just like a belief that there is like a boogeyman in the sky. Like there is cultural significance to ceremony that one could logically embrace and like bring to bear on your society. So that makes sense. The fact that they have the katra, they have his spirit go in, which, by the way, so when Sarek says that, I had this response being like, oh, wait, is that like some sort of like thing that Vulcans just do as they're like dying, their dying breath as they reach out to someone and like transfer their thoughts into it. And so like, is the live long and prosper that Spock does into the glass, him like act like instinctively trying to like send his thoughts through, but it's a radiation shield, so he can't.
That's deep.
Yeah. There was like this kind of like weird kind of psychological horror kind of component. Like every time a Vulcan dies, they must transfer their brain out. And it made me wonder, like, in Spock's very special case where his body was resurrected, that's cool. What is the larger plan? Like, do they collect the katra? Like, do they like they say all of his knowledge and so forth? Like that is such a useful base of information that you could accumulate. And
I mean, now headcanon, because I don't think anyone's ever answered this, but I hope that there's a place where all of that's poured into in some sort of library that they have where you can go visit the voices of the past.
Yeah, or like the Kree Supreme Intelligence,
Yeah.
That'd be really cool. I would love to know more about that, but they don't, because it was introduced it was introduced for this movie to justify them having Spock's mind to then connect with his body, because he had a body again. And that's fine. I mean, and it's like, it's nice. Again, it's like great to have DeForest Kelley do the like Spock impersonation. But can you imagine if this movie just had Spock's body come back and he didn't have his mind? And at the end of the movie, he was slowly recovering memories that were buried within his resurrected body's form. And I realized that is just B4 from Nemesis, but like better.
We've missed so many like Bones impressions, though.
I know. It's that part's great. I wouldn't want to lose that part.
I was like, I don't know if I want that to be edited. Like I kind of like enjoyed moments where like so when they're on the ship and they can't, I think Kirk asks for the distance that they still have left, and then you hear basically Spock's voice, and like everyone's like, what? And they look over, and I was just sheepishly like, was that right? Was it good? Like That was actually like a lovely moment. Like that was nice. So I don't know if I would want to trade it out. I feel like what you're saying feels more logical, rather than some sort of like, not Freaky Friday in particular, but something where like someone is also living in your body while you're living in your body kind of thing. But I don't know. It was fine. I get it.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. I think even though it felt far-fetched and a little more convoluted at times, because they don't use the device very often, I still liked it. I still enjoyed it because it added levity.
And we would lose out on one of my favorite lines in Star Trek, which is that green-blooded son of a bitch. It's his revenge for all the arguments he lost.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, as I get older, the more I love Bones.
Yeah. Because as you get older, everyone really gradually becomes Bones.
That's fair.
You know what we should talk about?
What's that?
Other podcasts on our network.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a break? We'll shout out one of the shows on this network, and when we come back, let's throw out some pitches, because I think that we're kind of just like circling around, being like, this movie didn't quite maximize its potential, but there are lots of podcasts that do. So check out these shows that maximize their potential.
Video games are a unique medium.
They can tell stories,
Immerse us in strange, fantastic worlds.
blur the very boundaries of our reality.
But at the end of the day, video games are fun, whatever fun is to you.
I'm Jeff Moonen,
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
and on Fun and Games, we talk about the history, trends, and community of video games.
It's a celebration of all the games we play and all the fun we find within them.
And there's so many more games out there, so we hope you'll share in that conversation with us.
Fun and Games podcast with Matt and Jeff. Find us on certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And happy gaming. Hey,
Oh, hey, Jeff.
what's going on, guys?
Oh, talking about Superman.
Oh, cool. I could talk about Superman.
I could talk some more about Superman.
We know.
I'll bet a few people would want to get in on this.
I'm down.
You know it.
That sounds like fun. I'll do it.
Cool, let's do it. We can call the show Men of Steel.
And you can find it at certainpov.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Yay.
And we're back. All right, so we've talked about how this movie is fine in a lot of ways. It's there's good stuff going on with it, but it's an odd Star Trek movie. It's an odd by the odd even rule. Like it's just there, not succeeding at being as good as the movie it came after, or the movie that it came before.
Yeah. And it's a third movie. So, and they may be cursed. Maybe.
That also true. So John, as a person who has actually made Star Trek films, if you were a producer of money behind the scene, maybe coming in as director, like how would you go about making this movie work, considering the budget and considering that Leonard Nimoy, one of his deals for coming back was he was the actual director. So maybe you were like the viceroy director or the AD. like what would you do to try to make this movie a more successful film?
That's a good question. Well, I like the idea. I mean, I think what we talked about, the death, and when he's resurrected, if you will, and then the crew comes around him, that scene I would have filmed differently, how we discussed. For me, I mean, when I've gone back more and more, and a lot of the sets, they just look so poorly put together. The Excelsior Bridge, for one. I mean, granted, they had some problems with the budget being a concern, but like the little Klingon freighter in the beginning of the film, which was just some boxes with a net thrown over it, and then you had the bar scene, which all of those just looked very cheaply put together. They didn't look like they were anything elaborate. I would have tried to do something more with those sets.
One thing I should note, we didn't talk about this. There was a fire at their studio when they were shooting. Apparently, it wasn't too much damage, but it did cause some damage to the sets that they had to work around.
I did not know that.
Yeah, apparently William Shatner like assisted with like putting it out, which is like kind of crazy.
Now, are you sure that was Star Trek 3? And I mean, I thought I heard that it was Star Trek 2.
The video I was watching today, Yeah, production on the film was temporarily shut down after a fire destroyed several sound stages at Paramount.
I Googled it, and it's talking to Star Trek 2.
Right.
Speaking of sets, it was on the set of The Wrath of Khan that Shatner got to show his real heroic skills when he saved the Enterprise set from starting a huge fire on the Paramount lot.
We might be in source because I'm on the Wikipedia page for 3, and it might be that Shatner wasn't involved. It might have just been. It might be more than one fire.
That is fair.
It looks like there was multiple fires. I'm not sure which one Shatner actually participated in. Suffice it to say, it looks like there were some issues with the set. In addition to budget, there was just like some destruction that occurred because of a fire. But yeah, so the Genesis just doesn't look very good. I agree with you, John.
Yeah, I don't. In terms of filming it, I'd have to look back even further. For me, I think that the film in itself provides the purpose of bringing Spock back. I mean, that was the whole point of the film. And from a franchise perspective, bringing back to make their franchise work. I mean, I don't know how they would have, I don't think they would have been as successful without Spock. I mean, like you said, he was in the pilot. He was the only one that was in the first pilot and then the second. And he's up there with Kirk and Spock, and
McCoy, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so they go together.
I did note that this would actually be the movie if you wanted to recast Spock. Like, this is actually a really natural way to do it.
Yeah.
Because you could have like a 20-something-year-old guy be like a young Spock serving under them now, which could be kind of an interesting dynamic.
Oh, you mean like, so had they gotten him off the planet, some hours earlier.
Right, yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting because you could it'd be like Groot.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, that's if you don't get Leonard Nimoy back, because that's the problem. Like, Leonard Nimoy's part of the cell. But in a world where they didn't, that would be a choice they could make, and the story text supports it without it feeling very hacky, which could have been kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, but Leonard Nimoy is the person people know from the series. He is easily the most visually distinct character from the original cast,
right?
By virtue of being the only alien on the original cast. And people just remember him. People know the Vulcan hand salute. People know a lot about this. Like, Leonard Nimoy got typecast in a way by virtue of being so successful at playing this part. So it would be difficult to not have him come back.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the outline is pretty good. It's a lot of it's the putting it all together. But Sam, I know you were coming a little bit harsher into this conversation.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that one?
So I actually think that the outline is pretty decent in terms of like the outline. But I do think that the script needs a lot of work, and it needs a lot of editing in the first half of it. And I would definitely cut one of the explanations of the death scene. It's just too much. And I would probably cut the actual first footage kind of thing and have it play out that the footage plays when Spock's father meets Kirk, and just kind of have it in that moment.
Yes.
Because it's just happening far too many times. And it's making the first half of this very clunky. And it's a lot more fun to watch these characters interact in essence, what is kind of a heist at the beginning, right? That's much more fun. It's much more fun to see Kirk and his crew do something that is not allowed of them and get away with it. And not only get away with it, but do exactly what they needed to do, right? So I think like that's just very clunky in the beginning. And I think overall, the start of this film, because it's so much like there's been a passage of time in the beginning, I just feel like that whole voiceover, like kind of explaining what happened and like the death and moving on, that's too long. And we can either have that in real life or we can have someone else explain it. In fact, we can have the kid with the punchable face talk about it. I just feel like it's just far too long, very indulgent. And so I feel like there are better ways to edit those moments in and kind of explain what needs to happen and what is happening to the crew and how it's being sidelined. That whole conversation can just happen with Kirk's commanding officer, right? Like you can throw that in there. You can throw into like this being decommissioned and there's nothing else you can do, and just have it be like like a 7-minute scene where they're like going at it, and Kirk is just like, okay, I'm going to do what I want anyway. And then I would get to everything that happens after just sooner, because it's not happening fast enough. And I don't know what I would do with the Klingons. I feel like they're good. And, Christopher Lloyd's voice is so distinctive that honestly, I found it a little distracting because he's just so distinctive, but I wouldn't change him. I think that he did a really good job with what he did in this film. It's just like, sometimes he's done so many different roles of my childhood that it's very difficult, right? Sometimes when you're rewatching this stuff. But I think like in general, their storyline was fine too. I think I would have wanted a little more drawn out, or like a little bit better explanation. Like okay, listen, we're watching this and you're like, clearly they're like, well, if you're watching this, you've trekked before. But I feel like this movie doesn't do enough to, like, if you had no knowledge of what these Klingons were after or why they were after it, the script doesn't really support that. So I feel like there needs to be something in there. Like, one of the things that Wrath of Khan did so well is that, like, there were moments for Montalban to kind of like be like, yes, my wife, like kind of just like, and whether or not we believed that's justified, knowing like past episodes, that in the movie, it gave justification for what he was doing. And I think this is what keeps this Klingon from being a really amazing villain, because I don't really know his full motivation for wanting to get his hands on Genesis. I know he wants it. I know that he's paid for the intel. I know that he like sent a spy to, get it, but nowhere in the actual text does he explain why he needs the power. And again, if you've trekked before, you can kind of make those assumptions, but the text doesn't do that. So that needs to go somewhere. There needs to be an explanation. Maybe someone dissents like they did in Wrath of Khan, which I guess I don't want to do that, but maybe someone dissents and he gets to explain it that way. Maybe he explains it to Kirk. And then, yes, definitely need to shoot the killing of Kirk's son better so that it doesn't look comically terrible. And I think that final scene between Kirk and the Klingon commander, I mean, I understand, like, Starfleet, they're supposed to have mercy and things like that, but I think it would have been way cooler to just have Kirk go right ahead to his baser instincts with this particular person because he killed his son. And I know, he doesn't kill the Klingon on ship. And of course I'd keep that because that's a highlight for me, that whole interaction, all those lines. I loved them. But I think, like, yes, ultimately he does kick him off the cliff and stuff like that. But I think it would have been kind of cooler to just have him just be like, no, give it to me. Okay, you know what? You don't deserve this. And just off the guy. Just do it, because this guy killed your kid and someone that you just reconciled with. Like, you didn't even get to have this relationship and start this. And it's just a second, really, or maybe even less of it, because you're not even going to grab onto the guy's hand. And then everything about Spock is fine, except for, no sexy time with your with you, possibly your relative. I'm cutting that.
We're cutting the pond far.
We're cutting it, especially now that I know that she's possibly related to you. It's just weird and creepy. And I will say, yes, I need the scene at the end to have more reference. And I think I would have strayed away from making the attire of the people in the ceremony. I would have strayed away from them looking too Egyptian. That kind of weirded me out a little bit. I don't like when people do foreign cultures to other space aliens. That makes me uncomfortable. So I would have stayed away from that. But other than that, I think that the last half of the movie has really good bones, and I think that that's how I would change it. I feel like if you fix that first half, it's much more bearable to sit through.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar place. It's true. This movie has good bones. It has good bones.
Yeah, Bones is great. I would change nothing about him. And also, like I said before, Zulu has to keep that cape. That cape is everything. And him telling that man to not call him short is amazing while he's in platform shoes. I love it. Tiny. Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
Keep it.
Yeah, it's a good moment of just like cut back to him and he's like a badass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're generally in agreement. So here's my thought. So let's say you want to have opening credits, and let's say you want to allude back to the events of Wrath of Khan because you want to have some kind of illusion. I think don't show the whole scene. What I'm thinking is like do something kind of like show like opening credits and then flashes with no dialogue of it, like maybe like a close-up on the hand touching the glass and maybe the hand rising up, kind of moments like that to hint at it, but not just do the full scene. And then what I'm thinking is have that actually be hinted at, like maybe like super up the saturation. And I don't know where you're at in terms of like 80s tech but I mean, this is well after 2001. Like we can do like crazy color kind of effects going on here. So do stuff like that, and then have it be Bones wakes up in his cabin and has Kirk message him to come to the bridge. Like have like a moment where we start off just like remembering the tension of it. And if Shatner was wanted to be the person to do it, he can also do it. He can have nightmares about Spock's death. But I think it would be telling if it was Bones, to start setting up this moment there. Because I think we don't spend enough time with it, with that until he's all like very firmly established as having Spock's, katra in him. Like, I think setting it up where it's like starting to emerge would be kind of nice. Because then you can then still go into like the captain's log of them traveling back and so forth. But I think that we need to bring back Genesis sooner without it being like we're going to cut, the credits of them like moving through that tracking shot of Genesis looks terrible. And I think I would rather I don't know why they're not scientists on the ground studying Genesis. And I think that it would be way more interesting if we had, David. And sure, let's say they don't recast, let's say it's Saavik and it is recast and we're kind of stuck in that situation. It'd be great if you just write it out as not being Saavik, but let's say the timeline makes it difficult for it not to be. If they're on the planet and they're being affected by the planet and so forth, and you could spend a little bit more time with her, like maybe they have like hazmat gear or something on so that we can establish her a bit before she like takes off the hazmat suit and reveals that it's a new actress, kind of the way that in Iron Man 2, when Don Cheadle is recast as Rhodey, he walks in and it's to his back and it's just like, I'm here, just deal with it. Like kind of like, have like a throwaway line for the audience to be like, we're moving on.
Yeah.
It's cool. Like, like identification confirms it is Saavik and she pulls off her mask, just to be very clear about it all. But I think that they should be studying Genesis actively and like maybe teleporting back and forth between the ship and Genesis. And so this could give us a nice moment of them talking about it where it's like, if the data fell into the wrong hands type line, like one of those type lines. Mm-hmm. Cut to, here's actually my big twist. John, you'll like this one. Cut to Harry Mudd.
Cut to Harry Mudd?
Yes. Cut to Harry Mudd, because here's my thought here. Instead of having the Romulan spy who like gives the info to Krug, how fucking dope would it be if we had a nice callback to the series here and bring back the actor who played Harry Mudd. He only was alive for a couple more years after this, so it might not be possible. He might have been in bad health. But how fucking fun would it be to have him be the person who sells the secrets of Genesis to Krug? Yeah. Like to have him as this like broker, like, black market broker kind of character. Mm-hmm. And my thought is have him sell it. And then Krug could, and we can make a note about how he also sold him like parts from a Romulan ship to Krug to set up that like maybe he's responsible for Klingons having cloaking technology. That could be really fun. And when we get the whole, so you saw this, that's unfortunate. I would like Mudd to actually have one over him, like have blackmail on him being like, if you kill me, this thing will be released. And, like all the information will be tied back and the Romulans will be after the Klingons. And do you really want that? And it's just like, fuck, I can't actually kill you. Like have like a fun scene there. So you don't close the door on this character, but it's a nice throwback. He would be, there for one scene, mostly just on a comm, but it would just be a fun reference for the character, the same way that by bringing Khan back as the villain in 2 or bringing Sarek back, that we're reminding people of the larger continuity of this. And if you don't know who he is, it doesn't matter at all. I just think it'd be kind of fun to check in on this character again. So Krug then goes to travel to Genesis. Meanwhile, we can be playing off the same kind of details. Like what I'm thinking is that because they're on the ground, they identify that, or like they found the capsule that was Spock's and that it is empty and whatnot. Send word back to Starfleet. Kirk here's this whole bit. Play out the stuff with Sarek kind of in the same way. Again, I think this is where like the Sarek bit is where it's the most dramatic way to like recap the events of the first movie, or at least the death of Spock part. If you need to have the security footage scene, don't play the whole scene of them talking again. Like just immediately be rewinding back through the whole bit, so that we're not wasting time on this one. And then say that Genesis, or that they've lost touch with Genesis, so that there's some urgency also in getting to Genesis that isn't just we have to get back to Spock's body. Because I think that while yes, it is respectful of Kirk that Spock means so much to him that he will move heaven and earth to save him in this very Gilgamesh-esque kind of way, like which is funny because like of the two, you would put Kirk as the Enkidu and to Spock being Gilgamesh. But in this scenario, like that's what's happening here. He's cracking open hell to bring back the soul of his friend, is the mythological thing going on here. And while that's cool, that is not the evolved human stance that we're at in the Star Trek timeline, because the needs of the many do outweigh the needs of the few. And the death of his son and the destruction of the Enterprise are losses to the Federation that kind of outweigh the revival of Spock in some regards. So I think having additional drive to get over to Genesis makes it less of a problem in that regard, because it is a big cost for that to play out that way. So I think they lose contact with Genesis, and Starfleet's like, nope, the Grissom is on its way. Like the Grissom is on its way back. It was, out of the system. It's moving back to check in with them. Like, it could be a scenario where the ship like comes in, checks in with them. They're up there. They beamed out a report. They came back down to the planet. They'll be, the Grissom will be back in like 2 days time or something like that. It's like, no, the Grissom will be back. Like, no, we're not sending any ships. And that's when we get the Enterprise heist. I like it as it starts. I think it needs to be longer. I think that the Enterprise doesn't do enough in terms of actually being this important ship in the fleet. I get that it's being decommissioned, and I get that they're on a skeleton crew with it all automated. But I think that the Enterprise should elude more than just one moment of getting away. Scotty's sabotaging of the Excelsior is great, and I think that should be the starting point, minus the sound effect of the engine breaking down. But then I think that they should actually have to deal with some stuff. Like I think that Sulu's piloting skills should be put to the test. And I think that all of them together should be like working as a team to overcome all these problems. Like maybe there's problems down below and Scotty and Kirk both run down and they're fixing this thing. Meanwhile, I think we should be seeing Uhura jamming communications and messing up Starfleet's attempts to capture the ship, so that she has something that she's doing during this escape beyond just getting them to the escape point. Give her a bit more going on.
Yeah.
Then I want to flip the destruction of the Enterprise with the death of David. I think that they arrive, they find out about the ship. I want to have this be sort of the halfway point of the movie, is the destruction of the Enterprise and them escaping down, because then I want to spend. So first of all, earlier I would like when Genesis is attacked for us to get a little bit of David and Saavik on the run from the Klingons on the ground. And I think that once Kirk and the crew beam down there, they link up with them and they're also on the run in this jungle world. And I would say probably shoot this on location instead of in a studio. I don't know how that's going to play out money-wise. I realize that's a problem. Location shoots are difficult, but this also could just be a lush forest, and you could also shoot some shit out like in the sands. The whole thing about Genesis having wildly changing environments allows you to shoot basically anywhere you have access to, and just make sure you're shooting under conditions that are easier to shoot outside with. Save money on your lighting budget in exchange for having more outdoor shoots. I realize that's expensive potentially, so I don't know how well that phases in, but I think that we need to have them on the ground running on Genesis a bit more. I think I'm going to take away the protoplasm kind of vibe. I think that really Krug coming, he should be looking for the Genesis torpedo. I think that he has enough information about what it is, and he needs to be looking for the device itself. And I think that him taking the device as a MacGuffin for this, for the third act, causes the planet to destabilize. Like he has to locate the torpedo, so he's looking for it and maybe trying to get hostages who might know where it is, in the case of David and Saavik. so that there's like stakes there. And then taking the torpedo, like excavating it from the ground causes everything to start to shut down in this terrible way. And so maybe we could have some time with like, the Spock, Saavik, and David on the run together and get some bonding moments, which could be kind of cool. Once the Enterprise is destroyed at the halfway mark, they all link up, and at some point, the three are separated, but we get some scenes with Kirk with his son before David is separated from them and killed, and we can have that be like the big dramatic thing at the right before we break into 3. And 3 should be like Kirk and the crew hiding in, like, doing some kind of like guerrilla warfare type thing. Don't go nuts. We've talked about Predator recently. It's hard to shoot in the jungle.
Yeah.
Like we don't need to go crazy on this one, but like mounting their efforts, like they locate like some piece of tech, and like maybe we're still in the race to get to the Genesis probe at this point, so they know where the Genesis probe is, so they set a trap for Krug when he gets there, something like that, to like funnel them all together, and then have the big confrontation, have it where Kirk is dealing with the fact that this is the man who murdered his son. But we get to have some more time spent on Kirk dealing with that. And I just think that would make it a bit more dramatic. I just think having action scenes on the ground on Genesis is wasted here. We just don't get them. And like, why else have a planet like that? This is around the same time as Return of the Jedi. Like, Endor had some fun action scenes. Like, do stuff like that. Make this movie feel cool in that way. And like I said, the rotating environments allow you to make comments about like at this time yesterday this was a desert, this is already a garden, and tomorrow it's going to be a swamp.
Yeah.
Like, shift it around. That can be a lot of fun. Like, they have to find something, but like the terrain is changing rapidly. That's all cool. But the protoplasm thing, I don't think actually adds anything to the plot. I think it just is a convenient excuse for why the planet blows up, and just don't have that. Like, just remove that part. And then this gives us some more time also that we can have like Krug sort of exposit what the benefits of a missile or a torpedo that can completely change the environment, and if he retracts it, kill it completely. I think like Genesis is a weapon. Like, we know it can be used as a weapon, even if it has the potential of creating lots of life. And this would be kind of fun. I mean, on this regard, you would need to have cool cinematography, because one fight we didn't talk about was Krug versus those weird worm things. And that's such a boring scene for what is ultimately a really cool idea of a Klingon versus like some sort of protoplasmic alien creature. Why was that not more badass looking as a fight? It was rookie directing. So get a good cinematographer, get a good fight choreographer, just try to make it interesting and try to sell it as being dynamic and cool. And then we're selling a movie at that point where it's showing, they're a little bit older, but they're smart, and they're able to while piloting a broken down ship, they're still better pilots and better equipped for space travel than these new top of the line ships that Starfleet has up against the Klingons. Like, they're not as tough. That, like, we're talking about a guy in his like late 40s, early 50s. Like, he's not going to be able to fight a Klingon to death, but he's smart enough to be able to like lead him into a trap and like take him out. Like, that's what we have to sell, that yes, they are still dealing with their age, but that they have ascended by way of skill and experience to a point where that part isn't an overwhelming factor. And then that way we can have, some nice Kirk with the sun death stuff, and like have that really mean something, and maybe have some moments with like a young Spock versus Kirk, and it's a little bit weird, but it's like kind of showing some of that sort of relationship as well, paralleling it, and then get to the end and just have fucking coverage of everyone's faces when Spock comes back.
Every step you take. Yeah, no, I think it's good, and that's also why Case always goes last, because it's always really thought out.
Yeah, so that's my thoughts with Search for Spock, and I think that we're all kind of in agreement where it's just like, man, if this movie had some tighter scenes, like the same scenes, but just like a little more interesting visually, that would be great.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we don't get it in this movie, and as a result, it's a middling movie when it had an epic buried within it.
Yeah, could have had some really nice emotional moments, and they kind of fell flat because of all the other factors.
Yeah. Like imagine like talking about like hellish imagery and whatnot. If Kirk doesn't actually unite with Spock until later, like Spock gets captured along with David, for example, when they like find the group or something like that. And so he never actually like gets with Spock until the end of the young Spock until the end of the movie. And he literally pulls Spock out of the fire, and we get like real underworld kind of imagery. Like they fall into a cavern kind of thing. And like that's where he confronts Krug, and Krug like produces his hostage, which is this young Spock. And like he and Spock both fall, and he pulls up Krug instead of giving a one-liner while kicking, "I have had enough of you," and like kicking Krug off. Like have this like, you know, like this epic moment, you know, like how many characters in epic poetry descend into the underworld and come back changed? Like pretty much all of them at some point have some either that or an equivalent. And this would be such a perfect time for it because it's bringing back a person from the dead.
Yeah, I agree. Also, about that line, I mean, I would have even preferred it to be like, "This is for my son." Like, "I've had enough for you" is not enough. Like, I don't know, it's something you say to someone like, you know, when you're leaving a room after they've annoyed you. "You know, I've had enough of you. I'm gonna go take a time out somewhere else." That's basically what Kirk said to him. Like, I would have much preferred him just being like, "This is for my kid."
Right.
You know, stupid Klingon. I feel guilty because I like Klingons, but I don't like saying anything stupid. But I felt like that line was just like, and that's what I'm saying. I feel like there just needs to be like a general, someone just needs to go over the script a little bit, mostly editing in the beginning.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because again, it's almost there, and it's just not.
But it does make this movie perfect for another pass.
It does. It's a perfect movie for it. But I feel like we've beaten this particular Star Trek movie to death. John, when this episode is coming out, we have another Star Trek thing in the works. Do you want to give a minute to talk about that?
Sure. So we just released Homecoming. It took some time. It was in post-production hell for a variety of reasons, but it's been released. This one is our finale. So it segues from the TOS, the TV show period, into the movie era period. And we have a nice segue with Stan Lee, and we have a nice cameo by Stan Lee, who gives us the order that the old Farragut has been decommissioned. And we are to report to our home port, Utopia Planitia, and we get a new ship. And we start new adventures. It's the new chapter of Farragut. It's interesting that reflecting back now, but having tabled the series for 5 years, and I wasn't thinking about coming back. I kind of threw my hands up at Star Trek and fan films and was done. But early this year, I was like itching to see the movie era realized. And I hooked up with a friend who I'd seen a lot of his work, and we've been moving forward on that. So we've already filmed. Last weekend, we filmed a 2-minute prologue for a 30-minute film. And it's the next chapter of Farragut called Farragut Forward. And it takes place in this time period that we've been talking about, Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3. We get to see the Klingons. There's a lot of nods and references that I used in Star Trek 3 in preparing for this film. So you'll see that when it's released, and we're expecting to have it released before Christmas.
For listeners, when this episode is actually coming out, it will be right about the time it is actually like Farragut Forward will be available to be watched. So either tune in to where actually should people look for when they're looking for it?
YouTube. You can do a search Farragut Forward. We're calling the 2-minute, essentially the first 2 minutes of the film, a teaser for the film. We call it Farragut Forward Prologue, and then we'll have another. The rest of the film will just be released in its entirety next year. But we are, as you know, Case, because you're directly involved as well. But for Samantha, we are building the bridge from the Wrath of Khan set. We have a studio in Frederick, Maryland, and we are also working on all the monster maroon uniforms, the burgundy jackets with the white nautical color, those uniforms, we are painstakingly making those. And all the detail that you saw in Starship Farragut in terms of sets, props, costumes, we're doing the same thing. And no one has been in this genre. I mean, no one has done it to the extent of making all the costumes and making all the sets. We are doing that. We're also tapping a seasoned, or I should say a talented director and cinematographer to give us the edgier and that darker look that you saw in the movie. So it's not going to be as campy. The sets aren't going to be all lit up. You're not going to see all the color. I mean, it's going to be darker, and which I appreciate. I think a lot of the fans will appreciate it too, because the movies were darker. They were both in light and subject matter. So
yeah. So I mean, like it's exciting to look at this era right now, because we're going from working on like TOS stuff where, you know, there was, like you said, like there's like a flat lighting that is done for TV, and taking the strengths of Farragut up until this point, which has been really good production design quality. Like John, your work on the costumes has been amazing for all these previous ones. And looking at the maroon monsters, they look so good. What the work you've done so far on these, the set pieces are going to look great. And now we're able to really take it and have our own directorial style that doesn't have to be matching the show in that way. There's more flexibility, and it's a little more daunting, but it's a really exciting era to be moving into.
Yeah, and I think that having, you know, like I said, I threw my hands up at Trek and fan films. It's been literally more than 5 years. And in that time, I mean, I think it's taking a break, because we were doing it consecutively, like back to back to back since 2005. And Homecoming was our finale. But looking back, I think it really helped us tabling the project and then coming back to it, because Mike and I made the comment when it was very surreal putting back on the Star Trek uniforms. And although it was a totally new uniform, it was still jumping back in the boots of Captain Carter. And I looked at Mike and I said, something like, I said, I think we were both in wardrobe. We had all the mirrors around us because they were doing makeup and they were doing some other stuff. And I just said, I think we're more seasoned. And he kind of laughed at that. And I said, no, I mean, because he said, you mean older? And I said, no, I mean seasoned. I think that having aged an additional 5 years, I mean, I look at how I look back playing a TOS captain, and now, I mean, I feel like this is the time of Carter. This is the time of Farragut. And I think even with Mike and some of the other ones, which by the way, all the entire cast members were all on board. They were all enthusiastic about returning and reprising their characters. I thought that, with this one being the last one, everyone was kind of done, but everyone has just been excited to see it. And so there's a lot of momentum, and there's a lot of zest right now in terms of the project and doing this. And I think I have some ideas to kind of be in total compliance with the guidelines, yet allow us to tell more than one tale. So with these sets and props being made, there is an investment to see more than one story.
Yeah, and I think people are going to be really excited at the first story that comes out, and then that should help give us the runway to tell more without it directly conflicting with what Paramount's current guidelines are for fan films, which are a bit harsher than they were 5 years ago.
Wait, you're saying the guidelines are much harsher?
Well, no, or they dropped 5 years ago, or 6 years ago is when they
right.
Yeah.
Right.
You almost gave John a heart attack. He was like, wait, do I have to double check those?
No, I was joking along with you, but yeah, I'm really excited to work on this project. John, you and I tomorrow, as of the night we're recording this, we've got a build party going on, working on some of the set pieces. So it's just a really exciting time. That energy is back after, like you said, post-production hell. It was rough on the last shoot, and I'm glad that we had that break, that we had that breather. But I'm excited for more fan Trek, because that is honestly what made me a real Trek fan. I've always been a enthusiastic person who liked to watch Star Trek, but like considering myself like a real hardcore Star Trek fan happened because I like linked up with Farragut. And so I'm excited to keep this going. I'm excited to move Farragut forward.
Yay.
People razzed me for that title. You believe it?
Really? I think it worked fine.
It works perfectly. I mean, it's on so many levels, but it's like I said, it is our time, and those uniforms will do some of the cast members a lot of grace.
Well, that was the case with the original movies.
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing it literally 15. Yeah, we've been doing it over
15 years. Yeah,
and we are one of the oldest and longest running web series. We branched out in 60s Trek, 70s animation, and now we are doing the same characters in 80s movie era.
Yeah, it's a real incredible project. I'm so glad to have been a part of it, and I'm so glad that, like, again, you're the person behind it all. Like, you're the person who started it. So I'm glad that I get to continue talking Star Trek with you. So just one more time, where can people find Farragut Forward when it comes out, and where can people find Homecoming?
Homecoming and Farragut Forward, you'll be able to find it. Just go to YouTube, do a search for Starship Farragut Forward, and you'll find it.
Yeah, definitely make sure we get those views so that so that people can see, and it makes it popular as opposed to diffusing the attention, diffusing those clicks. But outside of that, John, is there any social media or anything you want to plug?
If you can subscribe to Bespoke JB, a lot of that I push is through there, but it gets then repopulated on other social media channels.
And that's your Instagram?
That is Instagram, yes. Bespoke JB.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, everyone should check out the Starship Farragut YouTube channel. If you haven't checked out the series, I definitely recommend. Well, don't start with Homecoming. That's the end of the series. Like, obviously,
a good primer is the price of anything. I would start with that first.
Yeah. So definitely check out that. But the series in general has been just a blast to work on. If you love 60s Trek, that's a great one. And now we're moving forward to 80s Trek. So stay tuned for that. Just came out now. Check all that out. Follow John on Instagram at BespokeJB. Sam, where can people find you?
They can find me here on Another Pass, or on our Discord service, which is also Another Pass, and nowhere else, because I am floating somewhere out in space, just discovering new things and a figment of Case's imagination.
Yes, she is the katra floating in my brain.
Oh, God.
Meanwhile, you can find me on Twitter at Case Aiken. You can find the podcast at Another Pass. You can find more episodes of this show at certainpov.com, along with the link to the Discord that Sam mentioned, or you can find episodes of other great shows that we're putting out. We've got a ton of fun stuff right now. As of when we're recording this, the most recent show to join the network is Fables and Reflections, which is a Neil Gaiman podcast hosted by J.D. Martin and Angela Bones Bullock. It's a really fun show. They are super enthusiastic about Neil Gaiman, who is such a creative talent dealing with fantasy. And I love the introspective take they have on the works of Neil Gaiman, who's been an author that has shaped a lot of my interests. So check that one out. And then check out all the other shows, and then check out more episodes of this show. Sam, next time on this show, what are they talking about?
Oh, they're going to love this. Next time on Another Pass, we will be talking about Highlander 2, The Quickening. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Matt Storm. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
In his piece on Star Trek 3, so he well, for one thing, is pretty harsh about this whole thing. Sorry, I just lost the train I had there. Fuck. Sorry, I just lost that train. Never mind.
He was very harsh. We were talking about Savick. Anything coming up? Because I'm interested.
No.
Okay, never mind.
I'm sorry. Matt, I'm so sorry when you edit this.
Thank you, Matt, for everything you do. We're so sorry that Case is scatterbrained tonight. He's been working open to close for the last week, so
This is true.
Go easy on him, like Adele is asking everyone to go on her.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.